Hey everybody, Mike here. In today's video, we're going to talk about how vRealize Network Insight, also known as vRNI, how is it licensed? Now this is a really cool tool for getting visibility. You guys have probably seen me do some other videos on it and that sort of thing. But today I want to talk about that licensing aspect because this is something that a lot of people don't even understand. Even people at VMware don't fully understand some of the little gotchas and intricacies with how licensing is done. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's jump right in and we'll take a look at how vRNI is licensed, and then I'll kind of share where these gotchas come into play. So in this case, we have a vCenter environment. Let's just start out with one of those clusters. So we have a vSphere cluster here. We're calling it our dev cluster. And in that cluster, we have 4 physical hosts. We have host 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are running vSphere. And we probably have VMs on them. Now, for the sake of this conversation, let's focus on the physical sockets because that's how vRNI is licensed. Now, in this case, we have 8 physical sockets in this individual cluster. Now, next in our environment, we also have a prod cluster. And in this cluster, we have 4 more physical hosts. We have hosts 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we also have 8 physical sockets there. So as you probably picked up by now, each of my hosts in this environment has 2 sockets. So 2 CPUs installed on each of those physical servers, essentially. Now, wrapping around all of this, managing all of these hosts, is a vCenter installation. So vCenter is managing both my dev and prod clusters, and ultimately vCenter knows about 16 physical sockets. Now this is where things get kind of interesting. So we install Network Insight, we get it up and running, we connect it to vCenter so we can gather all of that data from vCenter. Now, how many sockets do you think we would license Network Insight if, let's say I said, you know what, let's just get visibility on our dev cluster. I don't really care about prod. You would think that you would only license it for 8 physical sockets, and you would be wrong. You have to license vRNI, this is the first gotcha, for all physical sockets in the entire vCenter. That is a key takeaway with Network Insight. That is actually something a lot of people don't know, and I've seen countless customers say, I'm going to start with 16 procs of vRNI for this one cluster, and then they quickly realize that they're over on their licensing because they didn't account for the other 80 sockets in the vCenter, for example. Now, the reasoning for this is that the distributed virtual switch is where we're gathering data from and kind of feeding it into Network Insight. And the distributed switch could span the entire vCenter. So that's why that licensing is done that way. So technically, yes, in this case, you could say I have a dev cluster and a prod cluster, but because the distributed switch could theoretically extend to the prod cluster, that's why this is done that way. So hopefully that makes sense. Now let's take a look at another situation. This is where things get really interesting with vRNI licensing. Now in this case, we have our dev cluster, we have our prod cluster. And a lot of people would say at this point, well, if I get NSX Enterprise Plus, it includes vRNI, and you would be correct. Now, I've seen this scenario play out a lot. So customer comes and says, Mike, I want the prod cluster. I'm just going to do NSX there. I'm not going to do NSX in my dev cluster. Or maybe it would be the other way around. This might be a bad example. The point is, they want to do NSX in a very small subset of their vCenter environment. Now, in this case, NSX would be licensed for 8 sockets of NSX Enterprise Plus. Now, this would include vRNI Advanced, which is an important thing to understand. So there's 2 types of licenses for vRNI. You have Advanced and you have Enterprise. Enterprise basically comes with all of the really cool stuff. Advanced is pretty basic. It does all the micro-segmentation planning and stuff like that, but it doesn't do anything for public cloud or physical flows, that kind of thing. So really, in my opinion, Enterprise is where you want to be at for the most part. Now that said, NSX Enterprise Plus does come with Advanced, like I said. So in this scenario, if you bought 8 sockets of NSX Enterprise Plus, you would get 8 sockets of vRNI Advanced. Now here's the weird thing here, right? So you would basically go into Network Insight in that previous example I gave you. You would install it. You point it to vCenter, and you would say, hey, I have my 8 sockets. You would add it to vCenter, and guess what? You're now over on licensing. Why? Because Network Insight looks at the entire sockets available to that vCenter. So in this case, you would have to buy 8 sockets of NSX Enterprise Plus, which includes 8 sockets of vRNI Advanced, and you would have to buy an additional 8 sockets as a separate SKU, basically, to add on to that so that you are compliant from a licensing standpoint. Now, to be honest, this isn't a huge deal. I would say it's more of an inconvenience, but it's important that people know this, especially if you're evaluating Verni, or like I said, maybe you work for a partner or a vendor or something and you want to include Verni in, a deal or something like that. It is important to understand how it's licensed because, like I said, a lot of people don't understand this. Now that said, I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. Until next time, stay nerdy. I always pretend that I'm typing or something. I feel like a news person, like typing away when I close these videos out. Oh, still there?